Hey guys, what's going on? So I'm sitting in my classroom, getting ready to do my tutorial. Hold on, bridge. And I was getting a little down about being inside all the time and not getting to actually teach you guys in a real classroom and that kind of stuff. So I figured, might as well get out, do something, enjoy myself. So I'm out here doing a little street surfing, and I figured I could teach you guys about basic composition out here. Why not? Campus flag! Ooh. All right, we're rolling? Good? All right, action. Gotcha, it's just me and my computer. And the forest. Anyway, so in order to identify tangents when we're taking photographs, we need to be able to see those tangents before they happen. So I talked about how we paint photographs, how we need to compose every single thing within our photograph before we even take the photograph. So with the digital age and with digital photography, we can take a picture and then check it, and then take a picture and then check it, and then take a picture and then check it. And there's really nothing wrong with that. I often find myself doing that, but it makes me lazy. It makes me just take the photograph and then afterwards take a look at what I've done. First, what we should have the appropriate type of mindset that we should have is we should approach every single photograph as if this is the one that's going to be amazing. Now, that's not to say that you only take one photograph of something, because we should still be taking multiples of every single photograph that we take. That way we can afterwards decide which one is the best composition with a fresh eye. But in terms of approaching our composition, we need to be able to see all of the different kinds of tangents. So, like if I was taking a picture of myself right now, I could see this side. Right there, there's my tangent, okay? I've got some nice space between the trees on the other side, but right here, I'm losing that edge. I should probably ask my model to move slightly over so we don't have that tangent. Okie dokie, hokey pokies, let's do it. So, tangents. Tangents are, for lack of a better word, a distraction. It's raining. Do you know what that means? It's time to dance. An unwanted component of our composition that we need to be very aware of. Tangents, by definition, or at least in math, is a line that connects with an object but does not intersect it. So in math, that means a whole lot of things, but in art, it means it becomes this unwanted point of conflict. Our eye naturally wants to go to the tangent, and it makes us subconsciously feel uncomfortable. That's why we want to avoid these. But the only way to avoid them is to know what they are. So we've got these 10 basic kinds of tangents. And in a way, they're all related. They all fall back into that same unwanted point of conflict, or where something just barely touches something, or something does touch something, but only at one point. So I'm going to go through these 10 and give you an example of some of my photography that maybe wasn't so good. All right, so our first tangent is called a closed corner. This is very self-explanatory. It is where one part of the composition is closed off in one of the corners. It breaks the flow of our eye as it moves through the piece. It creates an unnatural negative space, and it just feels a bit awkward. So here's an example. Landscape photography with a subject, and right over here in the corner, this is where we can see that I have closed off the corner. While it was a good attempt, and it could have been a really nice photograph, if we would have simply moved this subject over just a little bit, then we would have been able to have a lot nicer of a negative space on the other side. But we can see here, especially when I start to zoom in, that we have this guy way too close to the edge. Our eye gets hung up in that area, and we should have either moved him over or cropped him just a little bit more. Next type of tangent we're going to talk about is a fused edge. And this is where an object is fused to the frame. Okay, so we can see right here in a graphic sense, one kind of shape or one object, one subject, whatever it is just lining up right here on that top part of the frame. So over here, again, at first glance, we've got our subject in the middle or the top third, and then we can see we've got this beautiful texture in the bark and the lichens and the mushrooms growing on it. But as our eyes follow through with this major shape right here in the middle, it comes way too close to that corner or that part of the frame. Okay, so again, we would have either wanted to shift it over just a little bit or have that shape fall farther off of the frame, creating an open composition. Here's another photo of some macro photography. I've got an awesome part of this flower in focus. Everything's looking good. I've got some really nice negative space happening over here. And then right up here on the top, messed it all up. I had all of those lines touching the top of that frame. There is a good example of just about the minimum amount of space that we can have to the edge while keeping no tangents present. And that's that guy right there in the bottom corner. That little bulb comes pretty dang close, both on the left-hand side and the bottom part of the frame. Does not touch it, and our eye has enough area to travel around it without getting caught up in it. All right, so our next guy, fused edge, but with a shape. And this is where two objects just barely touch each other. So in this photograph, I've got this beautiful negative space that's happening in the majority of my composition. I've got this nice leading line that is breaking up my composition. I've got this kind of yin and yang thing happening where one side is predominantly negative space and then my other side is that positive space. Don't worry too much about those words. We will learn about those later when we learn about the principles of design. I just want to start getting our minds ready for that kind of vocabulary. Up here, I've cut off that tree in a nice way to where it doesn't feel like it is too close to the edge or not far away enough from the edge. Down here, there's plenty of negative space in that corner. But on a closer look, if I zoom in over here, we can start to see that my subjects have all been fused with the background. So in here, I've got this guy's feet fused with that side of the fence. Over here, the left side of her shoulder is fused with both fence posts over here and there. This lady's arm is then fused with that fence post. Over here, we've got some nice breathing room. That's okay, that's pretty good. But I was not considerate enough to take a look at those other parts of the person. Up here, we can see in this area, these are good. This is enough space around all of those fence posts that our eye can move around it. But then in further investigation, we can see that the rest of her body is still fused with that fence post. Stolen and shared edges. This tangent is where an object either steals an edge of another object, either by hiding it or overlapping it just slightly, or where it is starting to line up with another object, usually somewhere in the background. So over here, picture of some windmills, farm, storm brewing. Love the photograph. It's doing a really good job. I did decide to place this one windmill right in the middle of my composition. I did shift this part of the subject a little bit farther up, hoping to create some kind of focal point. I did not create a successful focal point over here because this value is way too close to a value over here. I would say in terms of a focal point, either somewhere over here or maybe even over here with the bright yellow, which is the minority of this composition in terms of color. But what I want to talk about is this guy right here. Guys, I sat here for probably an hour and a half taking this photo over and over and over again, because each one of these windmills is moving at different rates, and they're all not in synchronicity in terms of the direction that they are. So every time I would take a photograph, I would take a look. All right, is this windmill lined up? Do I have the right kind of tangents, or did I avoid my tangents? Is there a nice negative space? Am I accidentally hitting another point too closely to another windmill? So I took this over and over and over again, and I finally did get the shot. But this is a really good example of almost there. But the top of that pole with the motor and that one pedal or blade of the windmill gets right lined up with that edge. It steals the edge. Wrong. Almost, but not good enough. Sorry, dude. All right. Here's another guy of what we can also say lost edges. So again, I love negative space, and hopefully you will grow to learn to love negative space as well, even if you don't necessarily do it in your photography all the time. But if you do have an appreciation for negative space, you will begin to learn how to use it within your own piece. So I've got this beautiful negative space happening on the majority of my composition. The background, it was a crazy foggy day, so there were points where the background just seemed to get lost in the foreground and vice versa. So I did want to try to capture that. I wanted to capture where the snow just seemed like it continued into the sky. Well, here's the actual edge of that snow cap. Okay, it blends way too far in with the background. A better photograph would have been if I had been able to capture just a very, very slight value shift from either the foreground or the background with the other in relationship. But because it is lost, it becomes that tangent. It becomes this weird or awkward place where the exposure doesn't necessarily seem correct. Here's another one of a stolen edge or a lost edge and some shared edges. So these are the streets of San Francisco. I wanted to capture the busyness, but still the architectural beauty and the clarity of the sky in this photograph. This is another photograph that I sat there for probably way too long trying to capture something, because all of the people, the more things you have in your photograph, the more you have to be considerate of. So I'm taking a look at all the placement of the people, trying to crop people in the right way, trying not to crop people in the wrong way, trying to make sure nobody's staring directly at the camera, making sure that my sky was nice and clear, that I didn't capture too many clouds, etc., etc. Finally got the shot, but this is a good example of some of the places where I messed up. So right over here, this guy's arm and that tent behind it, the edge becomes lost or shared. Over here, the back side of his back and that pole is also too close. Right over here, the whole side of this lady's body and that pole gets shared and lost within it. We can see the same thing over here. So those are parts that we want to try to avoid in our photograph. I can see another one right here. Dang, dude. Another one right here. The pole and the column behind it. Should have been more considerate. Oh, here's another one. Dang.
It's called the old man shuffle.
So this tangent in photography is pretty close to the last one. They do share quite a bit of similarities. We call this one a hidden edge, and that is where one object completely hides the edge of another one. So very similar to the one before it, but there are some slight differences. All right, in here, we have two people hanging out at sunset on a dock, and this person taking a photograph of the piece is now hiding the one beam or fence post within this dock. The other one is right here. This girl doing yoga have accidentally lined her directly in line with that fence post, creating that other tangent. When you're working with silhouette photography, it is very, very, very important to think even more so about the positive and negative space, which again, we will talk about later. But in terms of tangents, when you create a part of your photograph that is a flat shape, the way that we do in silhouettes, everything needs to be very, very graphic in terms of things like positive and negative space, tangents, relationships between things, leading lines, etc. In terms of leading lines here, I did do a really good job breaking up this composition with these nice diagonal lines that kind of break the top and bottom up. I've shifted my horizon line pretty far down on the composition. I tried to create this pretty centralized or pretty symmetrical sunset within one of the intersection points of the beam. I thought that was pretty successful. But right over here, the girl doing yoga and the guy taking a photograph, I got them way too close to the fence post. Unsuccessful. Nice try. No cigar. No, probably shouldn't say that in class. Next guy. Decent photograph. Not too proud of this guy, but it is a good example of some hidden edges. And the main one I want to talk about is that tree in the top of that building, which then follows through with the window and the gutter or electrical pole, whatever that is behind it as well, which then continues into that part of the composition as well. So again, it's a minor thing, but we completely hid the edge. Over here, here's another guy. Rock, tree, and window, all being hidden. Part of the edge is being hidden by another part of it. So the simple fix to these kind of tangents is to take your body and move it, no joke, 6 inches to 18 inches in either direction. That simple change in the vantage point is going to drastically change your relationship between objects in a spatial way. Okay, it is very, very simple, but in order to be able to do that, you have to be able to see those tangents. All right, so the next tangent we need to talk about is a halved shape. And this is where you place either your subject or an object or some part of the background in your photograph right on the edge. You're trying to give it enough space, or you're trying to create an open composition, pushing that object or subject off to the side, but you have halved them right in the middle. So here's an example of China, actually. The city that I was living in, Chengdu in Sichuan province, and I'm taking a picture of all of these giant buildings, making them a silhouette, and trying to capture the brilliance of the sunset behind it. All is good. I've got my edges over here of the building, plenty of space, plenty of negative space over here, good negative space over here. There's a little guy that's a tangent, but we don't need to necessarily talk about him right now. What I want to talk about is this major building right in the middle. So that building, because of the way that I have cropped it, feels like it is pretty much right in the middle. It has been cut right down the middle. Now, realistically, I should have either given it more room on top and dropped the entire building down so we could see at least 3 sides of that building, or possibly even cut or crop the entire subject or the composition right around here. That way it gives plenty of negative space to bring my eye through the composition and then around back into the sunset area. The sharp point tangent, probably the most common tangent. And this is where one object creates a sharp point because of the negative space or just the shape itself as it lines up either against another object or against the frame of our photograph. All right, some more winter photography for us. Trying to capture some of the nice frost crystals on the branches. Feeling like I've got a pretty good composition going on. But with all of these lines, it is increasingly more difficult to be aware of all the tangents. That's not to say impossible, that's just to say it's more of a challenge. And a challenge is a really good thing to pursue in life. So here's where I messed up. Number 1. Number 2. Anything else? Oh, there's one. Number 3. This one is decent. It doesn't create a sharp point in terms of a triangle shape because of that line that continues down. For the most part, as I'm moving around the composition, oh, there's another one. It looks pretty good, but all of these points create points of tension. Points of initial conflict that again makes us feel uncomfortable, and it draws our attention to unwanted parts of our composition. Remember that tangents are kind of like distractions.
What you got? What you got?
Hey, you really want me to
Here's
get
my
in
TikTok dance.
there? Okay, you really want me to get in the Africa bean zone?
That's my stanky leg.
Distractions that we do not want to have within our photograph. It breaks up the flow of the movement within our eye. Here's another one. This is more of an abstract photograph. It is a photograph of a light underneath water at a dock somewhere around midnight under a very cloudy sky. So there was no lighting from natural lighting from the sky. There was only underlit. I loved it when I was walking out on the dock and wanted to photograph it. So I was able to do a decent job of capturing the haze and these awesome kind of flower petal shapes that were created. In a few of the photographs that I captured, you can see some fish. There's a little fish. That guy, I'm going to say right now, he's unwanted. If I wanted to capture some kind of fish, I would probably wait for some larger fish or for it to become a more dramatic part of the composition. The size and scale of that guy, the placement of it, he's not anywhere near the focal point of this image. It feels like I just forgot about it. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this dude. Boom. Point. Right on the top. Ouch. So close. I should have either cropped it somewhere around here or given it enough space to where that point was farther away from the edge. Here's another one. Again, I said this is one of the most common types of tangents within our photographs. It's way too easy to overlook, and with so many lines happening naturally within our photograph, it is very, very simple to do. But we still want to avoid it. So I've got this nice bench. In my exposure and aperture and shutter speed, along with post-production editing, I was able to create this kind of abstract painterly background, but a very hyper-realistic bench to give this feeling of a connection between the real and the surreal. Doing good with it, feeling good about it, and then bam! Oh, sharp point. Bummer, dude. All right. Split and stolen apex. An apex is the top part of an object or the point where two lines intersect. Basically, it's that part right there. So apex, 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 apex. Word. Get the idea. So a split and stolen apex is where either two apexes share the same line, making it split, or an object in front of it is hiding the apex. The reason this is so important is because apexes, I love that word, apexes are really awesome and dynamic sections within a photograph or a composition in general in terms of art. They're really beautiful to look at, they have nice leading lines, everything about it is desired in terms of art. So we want to make sure that we have those apexes and there's a nice relationship between those two apexes. If they're split, or not split, or close to each other. You know, you're getting the idea. Apex, apex, apex. All right, so here's a really good example of a stolen apex. Boom. Dang, telephone pole, why'd you have to do that? You stole my apex. Not cool, man. Here's another one. Stolen. Stolen. That seems like about it. Those guys, what we would have wanted to do is make sure that either we've given them enough space on top, or we would have stepped just slightly to the left or right, just that little bit, to make sure that it is not hidden by any one of those telephone poles. A split apex. That's where an apex shares the same line. So in this example, we have this part of the apex and a telephone pole here and the top part of that apex. All shared, all not cool. It would have been much more dynamic to shift those mountains off to the side so they do not line up in a straight line. Straight lines become static. What we want to be able to do is create the most dynamic kind of photograph that we can. Static is boring. Okay, here's another split apex, but in a different way. So this other apex, we'll call it a downward apex. I'm not sure if that's correct, I just kind of made it up. This guy is shared with this side of the telephone pole. So again, it's split. It creates that static composition. This guy right here, I'm going to change my color over to green so we can actually see that this was a good thing to do. This apex right here and this apex right here, they are all on different lines, and I made sure that I didn't accidentally line it up with this downward apex. So what that does is it creates a nice dynamic, an uninterrupted flow of our eye through our piece. As I was drawing those lines, I started to see, bang, dang, messed it up again. Split apex. Bummer. So some of you might be noticing that we're using a lot of math terms. And you're like, yo, math, art, nope, ain't happening. Science and art, nope, ain't happening. Not gonna do it. Nice try. Go back to art school, learn something new. Well, thing is, I did go to art school. And the thing is, hate to break it to you, math, science, English, art, history, all of those subjects are not siloed. They're not all of these different things that are completely unrelated to each other. In the arts, math and science are more than commonly used. There's not this separation of our brain the way that we have traditionally been taught. Realistically, everything is this kind of very intricate spider web with things sparking all over the place. And the more connections that we can make with things, the higher level of an understanding we will be able to have within all of those different subjects and be able to recognize things that we weren't always able to recognize. So when you hear me using terms from math or science, or if you hear your math and science teacher using terms that you've learned in art, realize that they aren't really that disconnected. It's like we're one really big family, just very different looking, but still super rad in all of the different respects. Because individuals, we rock. But a sense of community is super, super important. We call that unity and variety. Another principle you shall learn about later. We've got a few split and stolen apexes. One guy's right here. The bottom of that apex and the top of that pole, or the line of that pole. Here's another one. Here's the top of that roof. Here's a light pole going straight down the middle. Here's another one. It's a little bit more subtle, but it's the top of that roof right there and that part of the roof right there, all of which are stolen or are split apexes. Here's another one. I've got this vine, tried to capture it. My exposure was way off, way too dark. Don't see any detail within the vines, which was the whole point of my composition. But I've also split it almost entirely with a tree. Not a successful photograph. Here's another example of being very intentional with your photograph. See that guy? He shouldn't have been there. That was a photo bomber. Antlers. Antlers is where you have something in your background growing out of something in your foreground. Okay? It might seem very obvious right here, but it's actually very, very easy to do, especially when it comes to trees or buildings. So here's all my antlers growing out of my super elaborate and very realistic car, maybe? Oh, there's a car. All right, here's my car. Here's my antler. Kind of looks like a little pom-pom or something on the top of it. Not a good idea. Should have shifted my point of view just a little bit farther down. If I would have done that, the top of the car would have covered that tree. Another tangent, it's not related to antlers. Oh, anybody remember what that's called? If you don't, you should probably rewind this video and take a look at what that's actually called, because it's super important to know. All right, our last type of tangent, and this is also one of the most common tangents. I call it too close for comfort. So here is my beautiful illustration. Anybody see what it is? Anybody? What's your guess? There I go again, talking to myself into a computer screen in the middle of the woods. Oof, virtual learning. All right, well, if you didn't guess it, that's The Creation of Adam in the Sistine Chapel by
Michelangelo.
Basically, two objects are really, really close to each other, right there, and it makes us a little uncomfortable. And if anybody's ever seen the Sistine Chapel in the Creation of Adam, I don't know about you, but that scene makes me a little bit uncomfortable. And maybe it's the simple point of just those two fingers being just too close. And I get the concept, I understand. There needs to be a separation of God and man, but then God created it in the likeness, or God created man in the likeness of him, and blah, blah, blah. I get it. But there is a tangent. Now, with that being said, The Creation of Adam by
Michelangelo.
He used a tangent to his advantage. Okay? We talked about how a tangent becomes an unwanted focal point, an unwanted distraction. Well, what he did is he made that, there we go, flip screens, super rad. He made that the focal point. So he used a tangent to advantage. He knew the psychology behind it. He knew that because those objects were just barely not touching, that they would immediately become the focal point. And if you've seen that image, there are so many other things that are happening around all of that. But because he has pointed those two fingers really close to each other, then he has effectively created a focal point. I was trying to squish him, but flip screens. So for one of my photo examples, again, this is super, super common. It is very easy to accidentally do, very, very overlooked within our photographs. I did it here with almost every single one of these freaking sailboats against my freaking horizon line or mountain line. Bummer, man. All I had to do was literally drop myself 6 inches, and every single one of those would have gone up into the sky, breaking up the composition even more, making it more dynamic, creating a rhythm, another principle of design, into my composition. But no, I had to be lazy and just take the photograph like I was standing, blah, blah, blah. Lazy Mr. Biederman. Bad Mr. Biederman. All right, here's some documentary photography. Here's some documentary photo. One more time. Here is some documentary photography for you. Streets of China. All of these guys are washing all of the pots and pans out in the street. It's busy. There's lots of things going on. I used perspective to my advantage to create all these awesome leading lines. Hanging out, eating some good food. See this? Gotta take the picture. Whip out the camera. Got it. Awesome. I am very careful about this leading line going straight up into that person, straight into the middle, making sure that all of these other leading lines go right into that center part, even though that's not the focal point, because what's the focal point? Highest area of contrast, right there. Got that focal point. I've almost centered it, but just enough off to the side that it still brings some movement to it. There's enough going on in the composition that makes it have a lot of movement. And again, when we talk about movement, another principle of design, when we talk about movement, we don't mean physical movement. We mean movement of the eye through the photograph or the work of art in general. So there's enough stuff around here that is moving my eye through the piece. I've got a few tangents. I'm not going to point them out. I'm only going to point out the one creation of Adam, too close for comfort, right there. Dang, Mr. Biederman, you messed it up again. There it is. Let me zoom in just so we can all highlight my mistake. Oof. Too close for comfort. Not cool. Not cool. Not cool.
This is my ninja move. And watch me whip. And watch me whip. I think that was pretty good.